Avatar: The Way of Water was finally released onto the world and is directed once again by James Cameron and stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, Sigourney Weaver, Stephen Lang, Kate Winslet, and Cliff Curtis. Set more than a decade after the first film, Jake Sully lives with his newfound family formed on the extrasolar moon of Pandora. Once a familiar threat returns to finish what was previously started, Jake must work with Neytiri and the army of the Na'vi race to protect their home. Well, guys, it finally happened. After 13 years, we finally have ourselves a sequel to Avatar. I can still remember back in 2009 when James Cameron was first talking about the sequel, and we all thought it would come out relatively soon after the first film, but due to many delays, waiting for the technology for the film to grow, several setbacks including separating the second film into two films, and Cameron's insistence on not planning just one sequel but several, we finally have the long-awaited sequel to the highest-grossing film of all time, and I can safely say it was worth the wait. I'm a huge fan of the first Avatar. I know there's many people that still scoff at the film even now, and the naysayers of the film are many, but I never understood the absolute thrashing that this film got from viewers who simply dismissed the film as Pocahontas with blue people, Fern Gully, Dances with Wolves, the list goes on. And although the film is influenced by those movies, James Cameron himself even admits to it, I think that it is a vast oversimplification of the film. The first Avatar is one of the most misunderstood films ever made, and for a time I even bought into the criticisms people had with it. But after watching the most recent re-release, I couldn't disagree more with the people. Avatar, at its surface, is a simple story, one we have seen before, told on the largest canvas possible, with characters that are based on clear defined archetypes. It's a simple story of good versus evil, where the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad. It speaks to a general audience in a way that's easy to understand and surprisingly entertaining. And that's been James Cameron's entire career. He has spent his entire life telling simple stories, but twisting them in new and interesting ways. And Avatar is now one of my favorite movies of all time. I fell in love with the world and the characters, which I will admit are not the deepest, but neither were the characters in the original Star Wars, which probably sounds like sacrilege, but it's true. Even the original Star Wars resorted to archetypes to tell its story. Avatar is a myth, a fable, that shares many ideas we've seen before and creates a future that looks just like our past and shows that even in the future, humanity has learned nothing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with reusing these ideas. The characters, I think, are also fine. You understand them, their point of view, and though they never truly rival some of the most complex characters of all time, I still ended up caring for them by the end. But enough about the first film. Let's talk about this new one. So going into The Way of Water, I had huge expectations. James Cameron is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He knows his strengths as a filmmaker and storyteller, but even I feared the film wouldn't deliver on 13 years of hype. But for me, at least, I can safely say it did. I loved this movie and found that it improved on many of the aspects people condemned the first film for, and surprised me every step of the way. Is it better than the first Avatar? I think many would say yes. I'm still wrestling with my thoughts on the film even now, and I think only time will ultimately cement how I feel. But these are my thoughts on the film now. But before we get started on talking about the film, let's do what we always do and talk a little bit about the film's interesting production. After the box office smash that was Avatar, James Cameron began devising a sequel for the film, which eventually turned into multiple films that would be shot back to back. However, nobody could have expected how long the process would take to make the sequels, and as we know now, there were many setbacks and delays that followed, which is why we haven't seen anything for 13 years. Cameron didn't want to just make a sequel, he wanted to make a full saga of what originally consisted of 3 sequels, which became 4 after the second film's script became too large to be contained in one film. Cameron was also not alone in the writing process, hiring Josh Friedman, Ricka Jaffa, Amanda Silver, and Shane Salerno to devise the next 4 stories with him. The process took a lot of time, as writing on the scripts didn't occur until the story for all 4 films was finished and plotted out, at which point James Cameron placed each writer on one of the films. He wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page and knew every plot beat before moving on to the scripting phase. Very early on in the process, it was announced that actors such as Sigourney Weaver and Stephen Lang, despite their characters dying in the previous film, would return. Sigourney Weaver, however, would be playing a completely new Na'vi character and play someone much more youthful. The majority of the original cast would return, with newcomers and Cameron alumni such as Cliff Curtis and Kate Winslet joining the cast. Filming commenced alongside Avatar 3 from August 2017 and into 2020. Filming the motion capture first before moving on to the live action segments of both films. Visual effects were handled once again by Weta Digital, who had developed a completely new motion capture system that would be used for the films, and a massive tank was created to help in filming the underwater scenes prevalent in the film. Cameron also, at the time, toyed with the idea of glassesless 3D, but feared the technology would not be ready. The film's score was originally set to be scored once again by James Horner. However, after his passing in 2015, the film's score was placed in the hands of Simon Franklin, who previously worked with Cameron and Horner on Titanic. Anyway, with all that now out of the way, let's finally start talking about this enormous film. Avatar: The Way of Water is a monumentous achievement that I think is indisputable. However, much like with the first film, I think its masterful technical achievements are overshadowing the film's finer details when it comes to its story and its characters. Much like the first film, the story and characters have been criticized for being overly familiar and simplistic. But much like my thoughts on the first film, I think this generalization ignores some of the finer points of the film's storytelling. Cameron is a master of dealing with simplicities in his films. Even his film Titanic, one of the biggest and, in my opinion, greatest films ever made, is a very simple story with simple characters, but that doesn't mean there's a lack of anything to really sink your teeth into. So that's what I want to start out talking about with this film, and then we can talk about the visuals. The Way of Water is by far a much bleaker story than the previous film, with a heavy emphasis on themes we as an audience can relate to on an emotional level. Cameron uses the world of Pandora to tell a story about a family's struggle to survive, their dynamics, and the struggles of fitting in. Because of this, I think The Way of Water is a far richer film with a deeper focus on its characters rather than its world, which I think will give more people that might have been dissatisfied with Avatar exactly what they wanted. The film starts right from the start, focusing on the family of Jake Sully, their dynamic, and the film as a whole puts a lot of focus on the children, which are standouts in this film. I like how this film was able to add some much-needed depth to pre-established characters like Jake and Neytiri, and also get us to care about their children, especially Loak, Kiri, and Spider, who are the standouts in the Sully family. Jake Sully is once again played by Sam Worthington, and I know Worthington has gotten some flack for his performance in the first film, being one note and wooden, but I never thought this was the case. I think he plays the character of Jake Sully exactly the way he should. He's a soldier, he knows how to take orders, and has been conditioned his life to behave a certain way. The personality he has been drilled into him, or at least that is how I see it, and it's only through meeting characters like Neytiri and becoming involved in the lives of the Na'vi that he loosens up. As for Jake Sully in this film, I think he will make a lot of people who maybe were not a fan of him in the previous film like him a whole lot more. He's a hardened general and clan leader now who still is tied to his human roots, and so it skews the whole family dynamic as he treats all of them like soldiers in war than his own kin. And that's something he clearly loses sight of throughout the film when his family ends up in harm's way. Zoe Saldana as Neytiri is once again fantastic, playing the spiritual leader of the family this time, and I've seen a lot of people comment on how Neytiri's role in the film is greatly reduced, and this is taken as a criticism of the film. But I think she still serves the story well, being the emotional anchor for her children and husband. Now we come to the new blood of the film, Jake and Neytiri's children, who I found to be even more interesting than their parents and really are the heart of the film. Specifically, the characters of Loak, Kiri, and Spider, but I also think Jamie Flatters as the eldest brother Neteyam and the youngest sibling Took, played by Trinity Jolie Bliss, do enough to their roles to get me to care about them despite there not being a real focus on them as characters. As for the other three, I loved these characters. Britton Dalton plays Loak, who definitely goes through a journey in this film, trying to prove himself to his father and even himself. He's always getting into trouble and mischief, which leads to some severe consequences throughout the film, but he does learn from them, and I like how he feels a connection to the Reef tribe in the film, different from the others. He has a small fling that begins to blossom between the daughter of the village chief, Saraya, played wonderfully by Bailey Bass, and he eventually grows this bond with a giant whale-like creature in the film called a Tolkun, who honestly might end up being the most interesting character of the film, as its species are as sentient as the Na'vi. I also like how Loak in particular has to deal with being an outcast among the Na'vi, simply because he is, in some eyes, not a true Na'vi, because he was born from an Avatar Na'vi union, and so has 5 fingers like a regular human instead of the 4 that Na'vi possess. But the heart of Loak's story flows from feeling like a disappointment to his father, who is far harsher on him than any of his other children, and no matter what, he cannot seem to escape the shadow of his brother Neteyam, who he even tells at one point is the perfect son. Then we have Kiri, who is probably the most interesting of the children, played by Sigourney Weaver, who starred in the previous film as Dr. Grace Augustine. But here she is playing an adopted child of Jake and Neytiri, who has an interesting connection to both Grace and the Pandoran deity Awa. There's a lot of interesting things about her that I won't go into detail in here because I don't want to spoil the film for those that haven't seen it. Finally, we have Spider, though, who is yet another adopted child to Jake, and he's interesting because his character is human and has merely adopted the Na'vi ways. Now, I've been seeing online that this character is very conflicting for some, as he seems to switch sides from time to time between the Na'vi and the humans, and I really haven't understood people's point of view on this. He never truly switches sides at any point during the movie. He is simply trying to survive, and I found that interesting, and they have a few more things that happen for this character where his allegiance might be called into question, and it makes him a bit of a conflicted character, which I really liked. Next, I should probably bring up the Reef Tribe in this film and their leaders, Tonawari and Renal, played by Cliff Curtis and Kate Winslet. I really liked these characters a lot. When Jake and his family come to them, they welcome them, but with some reservations as well. They end up feeling like parallels to both Jake and Neytiri, but they are much rougher, especially Kate Winslet's Renal, who is very weary of them when they first arrive. Then we have, as mentioned before, Bailey Bass's Soraya, who takes a liking to Loak, and I liked how the film didn't just repeat the romance of Jake and Neytiri from the first one, and as such, I think their relationship grows a bit more and naturally in this film than Jake and Neytiri's in the first film. And at last, we come to probably my favorite character in this film, Colonel Quaritch, played once again by Stephen Lang, who many should know died in the last film, but has been resurrected through science as a recombatant, where the person's consciousness and memories have been placed in an avatar body. It's a great sciencey way of giving us another fun Stephen Lang performance, who is far more ruthless and evil than he was in the first film. They also do a great job of making him a bit more complex than in the previous film. I'm not going to sit here and say I think Quaritch wasn't the most complex villain in the previous film, but he got the job done. I know a ton of people will call out his cliche dialogue from the previous film, but I think James Cameron is a smart enough man to realize and put those lines there on purpose. This new film even pokes fun at some of Quaritch's most famous cheesy lines from the first film and in the beginning of the film. I think it plays into the kind of character that he is, but quickly the character changes tone in this one and becomes a much more menacing and threatening character and loses a lot of the cheesy dialogue the previous film was criticized for. They do some great things with this character in this film, and I'm just so glad Cameron decided to revisit this character so we can see him in a brand new light. Also, there is a moment about halfway through this film that will literally tug at your heartstrings, and I found it to be just a powerful moment that I was glued to my seat for the rest of the film, and the finale of this film is visually stunning, powerfully told from a story and character level, and made me overall very satisfied with how each character's stories ended, and made me wanting more by the time the credits rolled. As for the film's story and its themes, there's 3 hours worth of things to talk about, whether it's focusing on themes of revenge, acceptance, fear to things that are also relevant in our own world, such as saving our oceans and the aquatic life that we share the earth with. Avatar: The Way of Water is, at its heart, a big budget PSA for how we should protect our own earth, and I've seen people criticize this for being overly preachy. But how else are you going to get people to listen? I will say, I don't know if this film, much like the first film, will sway anybody, especially when most are here to see a giant action film from one of film's greatest directors. But it's clear this is all very important to Cameron, and I appreciate him for sharing his vision with us. The film has a lot to talk about, and even at 3 hours, there's clearly more it could have said on these themes. But I still like how each story beat and theme was utilized in the film. It's simple in a lot of ways, but it also makes it easy to understand, which I think is absolutely the point. Cameron wants everyone to understand his film, and sometimes to get people to understand and to listen, you have to preach it. Cameron's not trying to reinvent storytelling, but I think his images and characters, though not the strongest, still ride home many themes and messages I think we can learn from and relate to. I just wish some people would be willing to see that these films do have merit in their storytelling, not just their visuals. But the character relations are ultimately the heart of this film. From Jake to Neytiri, from Loak to Soraya, Spider to Quaritch, and so on. I think this film ends up being much richer with character and interpersonal relationships. The world feels fully realized with beautiful ideas and concepts. I love what Soraya says about the way of water. The way of water has no beginning and no end. Our hearts beat in the womb of the world. Water connects all things, life to death, darkness to light. The sea gives and the sea takes. These aren't just fancy words that mean nothing. They mean something. They even mean something to us as an audience. And I love it. Down to its very core, though, Avatar: The Way of Water is not about one simple idea, but many that coincide with each other, whether it's Jake learning to be a better father and treating his children as what they are, children, and actually seeing them, so to speak. Especially Loak, who he's extremely hard on through the whole movie. The entire film, it's him running away from the problem, and he must learn to confront things head on. The film is about the power of family and how they can be both a weakness and a strength. Neytiri is dealing with also being a mother, but also protecting not only herself and her family, but the people as well. And we see firsthand in the film what she is capable of when the lives of her children are threatened. Loak, we've already spoken of, as well as Kiri and her connection to Eywa. And it ties perfectly into all the other great concepts this film has to offer. I would one day love to do a full analysis of this film, going scene by scene, just so I can get my thoughts across on how wonderful I think this film's ideas are. This film looks phenomenal, and I mean it. This is simply one of the best looking films I've ever seen, and I know it's very easy to harp on the use of CGI in film and how there's an overabundance of it, and there's a push to do things practically. But if you're going to go hard with the visual effects, this is a clear-cut example of how to do it right. The first Avatar cemented itself as a visual wonder, and this second one improves upon that at every level, giving you a true feast for the eyes, not only in its environments, but the flora and fauna of Pandora and the Na'vi themselves, who just look so incredible. The first time I watched this film, and I've seen it twice so far, I remember just being blown away with the look of this film, and just wondering how this film got made. The times when practical sets are used blend so seamlessly with the CGI environments, it's incredible to think it looks as good as it does. Cameron and the team at Weta Digital have created, in my eyes, a visual masterpiece, and a film I think will stand as a benchmark on how to do realized worlds like these in the future. It doesn't stop there, though. The cinematography is also very beautiful, and when you're working in a completely CGI environment, you can let your imagination go wild with where to place the camera and get shots that you just can't do in real life. It's something you truly need to experience in the theater on the biggest screen possible, because that's how this movie was supposed to be seen. I also want to comment on the 48 frames per second that this film implements this time around. Now, as I said, I've seen this movie twice so far, and the first time I saw it in the theater, I was in a theater that was not equipped to show it in 48 frames. But my second viewing, the theater was. I had heard that the movie was actually filmed at 48 frames, and so it would make sense that this is the optimal way that Cameron wanted people to experience this film in. And at first, this made me very nervous, because I know the Hobbit movies, which were released in 48 frames during their theatrical run, had received criticism for its use of it. And I have seen how the motion smoothing works on most modern TVs, which can be headache-inducing. But I can safely say I think the use of 48 frames per second worked wonderfully in this film. and even immersed me in the world even more than I already was. I also have to praise the editing and the runtime. I've been hearing a lot of complaints about the runtime and how the story being told doesn't constitute a 3-hour plus runtime. But I have to say, throughout both viewings of this film, I never had a problem and never found myself bored or uninvested with what was going on. It's a big movie, and I think it ultimately earned its length. And in some ways, I feel it could have been even longer. Now, as for any complaints I might have with the film, they are pretty much just nitpicks that don't really hinder my enjoyment of the film overall. People have already discussed this, but during the final battle of the film, the Reef people kind of just disappear from the fighting as we focus more on the Sully family. And I wish we had gotten more of Jake and Neytiri acclimating to their new life in the Reef, seeing as they do more than enough for the children. There's also a complaint I've seen about the film in regards to the dialogue, especially when it comes to the use of the word bro by the Sully kids. The word and its overuse really doesn't bother me because when I'm with my friends, that's kind of just the way we talk. So I think the complaint of that bit of dialogue sounding like an old man writing what he thinks young people sound like is just a little misguided, as it's something I can easily relate to. And look at me. I don't think I'm an old man. And I've seen some complain that the film is just the exact same movie, and that really is an oversimplification of this film. Yes, it has similar beats to the first film, but it finds ways of turning and twisting those beats into something new, whether it's something happening to a different character. But I also feel like people are talking about the structure of the film as well. Film is a vast medium, and stories have to abide by a certain structure based upon the type of film it is and the genre. Both Avatar films adhere closely to the beat structure of the Save the Cat formula popularized by Blake Snyder. And so many films hold to this structure, these same beats. So I think people are really seeing the story structure of this formula, and that's far different from telling the exact same story. Avatar was a film about a man who sheds off his old ways and his old identity to find a new life and protect the people he sees as more his people than those he came from. The Way of Water is a story of a family trying to survive and sticking together as the father learns to see his children as they are and not what he wants them to be. Other small things like, I wish the oldest Sully child was more rounded of a character, but other than that, I think this film is pretty perfect, and who knows, maybe some of these minor complaints are even addressed in deleted scenes that could even be released in a special edition or extended cut later on. But as it stands, I think this is a phenomenal movie and completely worth the theatrical experience. Now, it's at this time that I do want to discuss a few spoilers about the film, so if you have not seen Avatar: The Way of Water, please skip ahead to this point. For those that have seen the film or don't mind spoilers, stick around because there's a few things that I have to say before the end here. Alright, so with that said, let's talk spoilers. So, that scene I mentioned that's about halfway through the film with the mother Tolkien, which is this giant Pandoran whale creature, is so tied to Cameron's message for the film about protecting our oceans, and it's this moment in the film that truly gave me the weight and stakes I was looking for in the film. We already had stakes with the Sully family being hunted down, but here we see that it's not just Sullys who are in danger, but the creatures of Pandora as well. This scene is so tragic, especially when the Tolkuen's children swim up to her for comfort, and there's no comfort to be had. We also see what the humans want with killing these giant creatures. Much like the first film with unobtainium, humans desire a precious source that comes from these Tolkuen that apparently stops human aging. It's ultimately small and not brought up through a lot of the film, but it begins to ask questions that are relevant in our own world, such as, are the resources we are retrieving worth it if they are bringing harm to others? Next, I want to talk about Loak, who is really the outcast of the entire Sully clan in this film, as he's constantly getting in trouble, but all he wants is to get approval from others, and especially his father. And so he makes this bond with one of the Tolkuen he rescues named Payakan. And it's through this relationship he begins to connect and have someone who is also seen as an outcast. It's a strong character arc that I think most people will look past because it is so straightforward and may seem simple, but I think it's also impactful. Kiri was also one I was really excited to see, and we see early on she is the daughter of Grace from the first film, being conceived from her avatar body, and it's obviously assumed that her mother/father is Awa, the Pandoran deity. She has a connection to Pandora and the others just don't have. She can feel her and hear her through the world around her. It's honestly very beautiful. As for Spider and Quaritch, this is one of my favorite relationships in the film. Quaritch is now a recom, meaning he has the memories of the original Quaritch, but he is now an avatar. And we learn early on that Spider is actually Quaritch's son, and the film gives a lot of screen time to them, as Quaritch takes Spider captive during an encounter with the Soulies. Spider then has to tag along with Quaritch, and they butt heads, but it's almost in a very playful way. Spider will tease Quaritch, but he's also not afraid to stand his ground against him, especially when Quaritch puts other Na'vi in harm's way. I think Spider is going to end up being one of the most misunderstood characters of this film. A lot of people have been talking about how his actions don't make sense as he flip-flops between the humans and Na'vi's side. But I don't think there was ever this flip-flop. Spider simply is trying to survive, and he has a personality that instantly makes him a more sarcastic kind of character. I don't know. He worked for me, and Quaritch does too. The scene of him finding his own remains and smashing his own skull is a powerful image, but it also means something. Quaritch is, in a sense, getting rid of his past and paving a new life for himself. And it also brings up the question, is he even really Quaritch? He has his memories, but what are memories? Can he ever actually be something more than a collection of memories? It's great stuff to think about. Also, I just mentioned it, but that scene where Quaritch captures Jake's kids and holds them for ransom is just wonderfully executed and tense. You can really feel the anger and rage going through Jake at this point in the film, and that same anger returns in the third act with the finale that pulls all the stops and gives us a full mix of the greatest hits of James Cameron. A big ol' fist fight happening on a sinking ship. It's here that we see Jake and Neytiri at their most vulnerable. Jake has been hiding his family through the whole movie, thinking this will save them, but when Quaritch eventually finds them, he realizes he needs to stand up and fight and stop running away from the problem and face it head on. The death of Jake and Neytiri's son, Neteyam, sends them into a fit of rage, particularly Neytiri, who is killing soldiers left and right in a fit of motherly rage, even willing to kill Spider, someone she has never been fond of because he is human and the son of Quaritch. We see that even she is flawed in her thinking when her children are endangered. And Jake faces Quaritch and, in a sense, faces his own past. But my favorite moments are the character moments, such as when Jake, after being so hard on Loak through the whole film, and even blaming him for his eldest son's death, finally gives him everything Loak could have wanted by telling him, "I see you, son." It's so powerful a scene, and finishes not only Loak's arc for the film, but Jake's as well. And by the end, he learns how important his family truly is. Their bond is their greatest weakness and greatest strength. And only by staying together can they conquer the dangers of the world. The Way of Water ends on such a satisfying, powerful note that I think trumps the ending of the first film through its use of themes and true emotional weight. Avatar: The Way of Water is everything I could have hoped for. It's a beautiful film from a storytelling level and a visual level that I think will please those who loved the first film and even those that may not have cared about the first one. There's always going to be naysayers, but I think there's far more to these films than people give them credit for. And by simplifying them into, "Oh, it's like this," or "Oh, it's like that," cheapens the film. I think it's a powerful film about family, love, loss, revenge, and tackles so many human emotions that we all go through. Cameron has made a film that maybe doesn't reinvent storytelling, but he never has done that in the first place. Instead, he has spent his whole career making films that play for a wide audience, that anyone can be sucked into and have a good time. And for me, Avatar: The Way of Water is one of those films. It's one of the greatest film experiences I've ever had, right along with the first film. But its themes and story make me prefer this film even over the original. I loved this film. And with all that said, I'm going to give Avatar: The Way of Water a 10 out of 10. Well, guys, I want to thank you for sticking around for this whole review. There was a lot about this film I wanted to talk about, and a lot I needed to get off my chest. But I hope I made my case clear for why I love this film. If you haven't seen Avatar: The Way of Water, I suggest you do, if only to get one of the greatest film experiences you'll have in your life. And maybe you'll even share my opinions on the film. I think this is probably going to be the last review I do for this year. I have a lot of plans for more reviews coming in the new year, and I might make a video talking about my plans just so you can get a feel for how things are going to go moving forward. But anyway, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.